Hey, my name is Doug Sparks. Is this working? Trying this as a test for a new YouTube channel idea called Enlightenment Cafe. At least it's called that right now. I find it hard to believe that nobody has that name. I like the idea of Enlightenment Cafe because one of my great interests in life is cafe culture, and I'm one of those rare individuals who likes and is a little bit obsessive about tea and coffee. I drink them both. And I love the idea of the 18th century English tea house or coffee house, which is where a lot of the thinkers of the day, back when things hadn't been divided and split and fractured in the way they have now, maybe you might call them philosophers, but people who did art, literature, poetry, science, politics, when these were all sort of together in the cafes and the coffee shops were the places where people got together to discuss. And I wish we had more of that. So that's why I'm calling this the Enlightenment Cafe. And then obviously it's a little bit of a nod to to some of the religious and spiritual traditions that underpin the drinking of tea, which has frequently had a religious component. I'm trying to get this to work. I haven't used this kettle in a while. I don't know why it's not working. Oh, it is working. Okay. Just haven't used this one in a while. And I'm going to make some tea. And this is the golden water turtle from Yunnan sourcing, right here. And I'm going to brew some tea, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the books I'm reading. My kids are upstairs. I have young kids, and they throw tantrums a lot, and they go nuts sometimes. So if you hear screaming in the background, no one is dying. It's just my kids putting up a fuss, as they do. All right. So I just finished War for Eternity by Benjamin Teitelbaum, and this is a book about I guess the intellectual I guess maybe fringe isn't the right word now. What would normally be sort of a fringe right-wing intellectual movement centered around a guy named Julius Evola. Evola is probably the main figure here, and a philosophy called traditionalism, which is in a sense like a lot right now from all different directions, sort of a counter-enlightenment sort of position, right? It believes it's not really something that believes in progress. It believes that history is cyclical, and that we need to look towards these inevitably lost traditions for guidance. Traditionalism is deeply problematic, as anyone who's looked into it knows. Oftentimes, its main proponents are anti-Semitic and racist, and if they're not, they're sort of in bed with anti-Semites and racists a lot of the time. Steve Bannon is probably, it's the first time anyone from this sort of fringe or inherent of this fringe philosophy in the United States has gotten anywhere close to power. And if you read about Bannon, you read about Evola and the people in this circle, it gives you some insight into what happened over the past 4 years if you're living in the United States. What's interesting about Teitelbaum's book, though, I find, is the writer. He's an academic, and he's not a political philosopher. He's a musicologist, and his first book was on racist and far-right music movements in Northern Europe and Scandinavia. I've also read that book. It's a good book, but the new one is better. Teitelbaum has grown a lot as a writer. And it's just as a book, it's fantastic. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know that if you went to Goodreads and if you went to Amazon and read user-submitted reviews, because I don't know what it is. People feel so critical of writers. They feel like you'll never find, like someone can spend 10 years laboring 15 hours a day on a book, and it's a masterwork, and it's still going to get 3.5 or 4 stars. And it's like I'm the type of guy, like we'll get DoorDash, we'll order food come in, and I don't care. People, in general, everybody's good, right? But every once in a while, some nitwit hangs the food on the doorknob, so we can't actually open the door to get to it without knocking the food over and spilling. I still give that person 5 stars, right? Because they could have had a bad day. Yeah, who knows? Who knows, right? I err on the side of being forgiving. It's a completely different case when it comes to books, though, because I know I'm an editor, and I know how much work goes into a small piece of writing, a 600-word piece of writing, right? So imagining what goes into something like War for Eternity, and how much research and how much effort, and this guy, like, I think in the afterword talks about, how his wife, I just simply couldn't do it, but his wife was able to help him when he was working on the book, and his neighbors and extended family, and the amount of work that must have gone into doing this is, unless you've been a writer, or an editor, and been involved in publishing, it's really hard to imagine what goes into it. So anyways, a lot to say about that book. I'd love to discuss it on multiple levels. It certainly had me rattled. And then it also kind of, it's like one of those, like you sometimes see a horror movie you really like, or that gets under your skin, and then you go out in the world and you just see shadows behind every tree. And I don't want to say I see traditionalists behind every tree, but it certainly, when people use a rhetoric about a certain type of tradition, and one of the weird things about traditionalism, if you don't know anything about it, is it's not necessarily European in its focus. A lot of these guys, even if they did have racist beliefs, were like students of Hindu philosophy and students of Buddhism. You have to read the book to understand how complex and kind of crazy this all gets. But this idea of turning to some lost, it's basically anti-scientific, right? Science was this big colossal misstep, and it's allowed for this kind of universal globalists to come in and control people, and all this stuff that I think for most of us is hogwash. But there's strains. I mean, I hear anti-science, not necessarily from intellectuals, not necessarily from people who think about it, but you get an anti-science position, all the time, just by living in Massachusetts, or living wherever you are, and you sort of see the logical extension of some of these positions. So, anyways, I found the book pretty fascinating. I need to use another kettle. I haven't used this one in a while, and the problem with this kettle is that it doesn't tell you what temperature it's at, which is okay today because I'm doing an oolong, but sometimes I want to know what temperature things are at. Okay, so here, let's fill up my guy one. It's a little cold in my basement right now. Pardon my haircut. My wife has told me I should probably trim my hair, but no, I don't want to. It's getting a little crazy, and it's greasy right now. It's better when it's not. All right. Which one am I going to use? Let's go. Actually, this. Go. This warms up all my vessels. It cleans the dust out of them, and it's sort of a ritual that we go through while we're getting ready. So here's the tea. How can I get better at this? Here's the tea. Actually, put that right here, where I don't have to worry about it getting wet. I don't want that to get wet. And here's the first cup. I'm not doing a wash on this. Certain teas I would do a wash. I don't like doing a wash on an oolong, especially something like this, which isn't a ball oolong. I really like that first cup, and I don't know why I would waste it. To the Gongao Bay, the Fairness Cup, which would normally be used to share smaller cups of tea. I'm doing this by myself. I don't need to worry about that. I do want to get this guy though. You see my little teapot? Let's give him a little, pour out a little for the teapot. And my pitch pine tea, it's like a Unomi, I think. It's like a, you know, not like this. Compare the size, not like the kind of a small teacup, but also not like the chawan, like this, which you would use for matcha. See the difference, right? All right. So the Teitelbaum book, and then the one that I'm reading or kind of rereading right now is Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, which is a book on mushrooms. It's a recent book on mushrooms. Sheldrake is just a fantastic writer. He's a great prose stylist. He has really engaging style. He comes across as, not that I'm in a position to judge, as a someone who really knows his science. He is a scientist. It's funny how many scientists were great writers, and this goes way back. Like if you read like the early, the science writers before science was called science, when it was still called natural philosophy, a lot of them could really put a sentence together. Darwin was a really great prose stylist. People don't understand that. He was really good as a writer, as a person who put words together. So, charcoaly, earthy. It's cold out. It was like 6 degrees when I went out for a hike this morning. So this tea is in the spirit of that. If you have any questions, please, about tea or anything I'm talking about, please put them in the comment section. And any requests for me to cover anything, please, and subscribe if you don't mind. I'm sort of new at this and using it for a number of reasons. A friend of mine encouraged me, and maybe I'll get him on later to talk and interview him. He encouraged me to do this. I have a podcast for Merrimack Valley Magazine called The 495. It's a community and culture podcast. But I kind of want to do something where it's more, personal, almost like maybe like an intellectual kind of diary that also involves conversations about the issues of the day in a different way than it would be covered if it was for a local magazine, right? Local magazine, the guests have to be local, they have to be part of the community, and they have to be doing something that is important or interesting in terms of the neighborhood, broadly defined, right? They're not going back 1,000 years into speculative tea history. They're not talking about Steve Bannon, the traditionalist movement, and they're not, in general, reading and discussing Merlin Sheldrake, Entangled Life, which strikes me as just very fair. I mean, it's one of those books where you feel as though you're in good hands. When he begins to take you down the path of explaining something interesting that happened in developments of mycology, the study of mushrooms in the 20th century, he seems fair. It's like some people, consider this guy a nut. Some people consider this guy a saint. Here's what this guy said. Here's the development of their thought over time, and it just seems fair. It just seems fair. There's never any ranting. You're like, as I said, you feel as though you're in good hands, right? And this is important. Nothing in there is going to make you rush out and take a heroic dose of psilocybin mushrooms if you're ill-informed. All right, you get multiple sides as well as the history and the stuff you need to know, and you're also not scared unnecessarily. Now, I don't even want to mention psilocybin and psychedelic mushrooms too, because I think people who aren't into mushrooms are so kind of focused on that as being part of the mushroom experience this happens on Facebook. I like to forage mushrooms, right? And whenever anybody, not in a forum, you see it a little bit in forums, but in general, like if a local person finds some mushroom in the yard and they post it, there's always some guy who makes a comment right away about like, don't take that or you'll be seeing dragons or you'll be seeing, your feet grow or something. Every single time, literally every single time someone's going to make that stupid joke. All right. And then someone's going to get on and they're going to say there's old mushroom hunters and there's bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old bold mushroom hunters. And then someone's going to get on and say, don't eat that. It's going to make you sick. Please don't. And then someone's going to get on and say, oh no, do the thing where you drop a silver spoon in water with it, or try a little bite. And if you're fine the next day, then go ahead. All bad advice, right? All terrible, terrible advice. Just so you know, most mushrooms are not edible. If you find a mushroom in your yard, don't rush to Facebook and post it and say, is this edible? I can tell you right now, it's not. There's a few that are edible. It's actually a lot, but as far as the stuff that you're probably going to find, there's some that's edible, there's some that's deadly, and then most of the stuff in the middle, it's not going to taste good. It's just not interesting. It's not food. It's just growing in the yard. It's growing on a tree. Don't worry about it, right? What's interesting about mushrooms isn't can I eat this or not. It's mushrooms themselves, because we understand very little at this point about mushrooms, and we're learning a tremendous amount right now. So if your only interest is can I eat this or not, I will tell you right now, spare yourself the time. You cannot eat that thing. If you mess up, you're going to end up in dialysis. So don't worry about it. If you're curious about mushrooms as a whole, beyond psychedelics and beyond just eating them, there's a great big world out there that will get you out into the woods and get you exploring the ground beneath your feet. All right. Let that come up again. Once again, I need to change out this kettle. So this is good. This is my downstairs kind of hidden tea setup. I had this idea at one point. I remember reading about the jazz cafes in Japan. And you would go and there would be a really, really nice high-end stereo system with records and a heavily curated selection of jazz music. Ultimately, it would also be other types of music. And people would go and they would drink expensive whiskey and listen to really, really beautiful jazz music on an expensive, high-end, perfect audio system. And I remember loving this idea. I don't love it as a business because I live in the United States and it would never work. You could never get people to come in and quietly contemplate music silently over a beverage. But I still like the idea of it. So I had this, it's like, and at the time I had a really nice record player. I got rid of it when the kids came along because I can barely listen to music now. If you have young kids, you know what I'm talking about. It's just impossible. I bought a Tangerine box set weeks ago with I think 12 CDs in it, and I was finally able to open it. And every day thinking I want to open that and listen to it. I finally opened it and listened to it yesterday, and I got through 5 CDs, which was a miracle. It was probably the most I've been able to listen to music on my stereo since COVID started over a year ago. That's what it's like. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. So, anyways, the idea for this was, okay, I can't do that. I can't, this is over. It's not gonna make a good business model, right? I'm not a business person. But can't I do something like that in my own basement? Can't I lay out some really, really fantastic teas, put a nice stereo over there, and put my Tangerine Dream box set, or whatever it is I want to listen to, Delta Blues, Ornette Coleman, Bob Dylan, whatever it might be, electronic music, ambient, whatever I want to fill the space, and have a few friends over and have this conversation where we would talk about issues of the day, and we would talk a little bit about Merlin Sheldrake and mushrooms, and we would have this kind of quiet conversation while we would listen to music. Wouldn't that be nice? And I was even starting to kind of put the pieces for this together, which is why you see all my teaware here. This is a mess. It's chaotic. But this ultimately was going to lead to something where I would have a few of my friends over, and we would talk. We would talk to each other about important matters over tea, over very, very good tea, exceptional tea. Well, that's good. And then COVID came along, and nobody's coming to the basement, and the basement is a huge mess. And my teaware collection of what you see of it is a mess as well. So be it, right? There's worse fates than this. But I still think about it. I still think about this idea of a kind of jazz cafe of the mind, right? Where you can sit in the company of other people who are there not to yammer on their cell phones or cause a fuss or scream at a TV about a football team or something, right? But just kind of want to talk and maybe learn something and maybe connect with people in a different way, or in a spirit of fairness and in a spirit of being inquisitive. That's the idea. Maybe someday. Or maybe someday, who knows? The apocalypse will come and you'll find me out by the roadside in a little thatched hut, brewing tea for people to come by, and putting out my little donation cup for people to donate. Tea has a chemical in it called theanine. It's like the word caffeine. You have the, like thé, the French thé, like tea at the front. And unlike caffeine, which is a stimulant, theanine seems to settle the nerves, which is part of the reason why you drink a lot of tea. You don't have that same agitation that you get from coffee. I like that sense of agitation. I drink coffee. I go for it. But I also like the evening effects of theanine and some of the other stuff that comes along with tea and the way it's prepared. And you understand why it's used in spiritual practices centered around meditation. When you meditate, whether the intention is to get into a state of serenity, or if you happen to get into a state of serenity through the practice, it's still optimal to reach this state of serenity, or be in this state of serenity, or aim for this state of serenity as much as you can, or take a step towards it. So you want this serenity, but at the same time, what's the other problem with meditation? Is flagging concentration and weariness, and you start to get tired. So the caffeine is great on both sides. It brings you into that more meditative, serene state, and it also prevents you from going so serene that you want to fall asleep. If you have certain teas that are filled with theanine or different chemicals, some people in the tea scene would talk about this in terms of chi or some type of energy. You can actually get tea drunk. You can have this feeling of almost like intoxication or giddiness that can come from tea, and different teas elicit different states of tea drunkenness. I was thinking about doing some sort of play on the term tea drunk in the title of this, whatever I'm doing, this YouTube channel. I couldn't come up with one. Maybe someday. Let's do one more cup. Maybe someone's still listening to this. Who knows? So, the other cultural product I've been enjoying recently, beyond Merlin Sheldrake and Benjamin Teitelbaum's book, is a cartoon for children called Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, if you're a tea head, you probably know about this already because one of the central characters in the show is a tea enthusiast, and tea plays an important role in this show. I had heard about Avatar: Last Airbender. I heard it was kind of complex. I heard there was some interesting stuff going on. I know it's much beloved. I tried watching it a few times. Didn't really stick to me. I mean, it is a show for kids, not for people who look like me. But then I started watching it with my toddlers, and they don't entirely get what's going on in the show. In general, if it's above their heads, they're not interested. They want the worst. They want the worst. They want the screechy, repetitive, like awful kids programming that's out there, where all the characters speak in these high-pitched voices, and they're always breaking into songs with auto-tune, and they also want to watch them over and over again. So it's irritating at first, but by the 30th or 40th time, it's completely irritating. But then if you turn it off, they're going to have a tantrum. And you know you have to turn it off anyway, so you turn it off, they have a tantrum. The tantrum lasts for an hour. Eventually the show comes back on. Some of you know what I'm talking about. The benefit of Avatar: The Last Airbender is my kids will pay attention to it enough. They don't really seem to obsess over it. It's like a food that they like, that tastes good. Like my kids like steak. But they're not constantly asking me for steak. And if I give them a steak, they're not going to eat the whole thing and then ask for more steak. Right? Avatar is a little bit like that to them, where they enjoy it, and it even seeps into their conversations in weird ways. They have this. So in the Avatar world, there's different nations that relate to different elements. So there's a fire nation, a water nation, an earth nation, and they've started kind of talking about this in pretending to be characters from these different nations, and the other thing that they can do, at least the older toddler can do, that is interesting to me, which I haven't seen before, is she can tell when characters are in disguise, when they're doing some sort of deception, or they're pretending to do something where their intentions are different. You see what I'm saying? Like I've never seen this before, but she'll see a character decide to dress up as a spirit, and she'll know that it's the character dressed as the spirit, and that she's doing this to achieve certain ends, right? When they're younger, when the character dresses like the spirit, now the spirit is a different character. It's a completely different character, and they don't get that it's someone putting on a disguise. The other thing about Avatar: Last Airbender that is interesting is they wouldn't tolerate it during the day, and I also like it, so I want to watch it with them. When they're watching something during the day, it's just chaos, and it's not enjoyable. It's not enjoyable to watch anything with them during the day. They have to watch stuff on their own. They get up early. They hate to sleep. They fight to go to sleep at night, and then as soon as like a ray of consciousness flitters across their eyes at 2:30 in the morning, or 3 or 3:30 or 4, they're up, banging on the door, and they want to hang out. Trying to get them off this, we're doing what we can. We have not been successful. So I can't sit there for 5 hours just hanging out with the kids and watching Cocomelon or some horrible times infinity TV show that they normally like, right? So I want to get something out of it. In Avatar is that bridge between us. There's sophisticated, complex things going on in Avatar beneath the surface. I like a lot of the characters. There are hidden levels to the show that makes it extremely sophisticated for a children's show. And we're watching it at 3 or 4 in the morning. It's a beautifully animated show, and some of it is very dreamlike and strange, and seems to have an element of subconscious logic to it. So it's great to watch at 4 in the morning because the characters are going down to these caves with glowing minerals, and they're like encountering these bizarre woodland spirits, and if you're watching it at 3 in the afternoon, I would imagine it is a completely different experience than at 3 in the morning when you've just woken up and you're still kind of in this haze, and in some sense there's a blurring of the lines between the show and yourself. And I see this with the kids. I see that it's almost like they remember more of Avatar than they do of Cocomelon. It filters into their unconscious more, and they start playing out these roles. There's this giant flying bison that they love on the show named Appa, and they love Appa. Whenever Appa's on screen, they want to know everything about Appa and what he's doing, and they don't understand it, but they want to know everything about Appa. And there's a scene in one of the shows where Appa is gone, and everyone's devastated, and they'll look up and they'll see like clouds, and for a second the cloud will look to the character like Appa, and then the cloud breaks up and you realize it's not Appa. Or he'll see this tree that has like whitish foliage like the water buffalo, and from a distance it looks like Appa's coming back to see them, and they get close and they realize it's just a tree. So the older toddler was talking to the younger toddler and saying, "You see Appa up in the tree over there? That's not Appa, it's just a tree." And she was like enacting some of this stuff. It sounds maybe to you, if you haven't had kids, pretty mundane, but amazing in light of development, right? In terms of development of where these kids were and where they are now. It's a level of sophistication in their imaginary lives that I didn't see 6 months ago. The long and short of it, though, is that this works for me because I also enjoy it. I tried to get them to watch Miyazaki films. I've tried to get them to watch Princess Mononoke. It's too they just don't get it. It doesn't work for them. For whatever reason, Last Airbender connects. There's enough there. Oh, and then the other funny thing is the older toddler. I don't want to use the word crush because there's I think people overuse it and overread adult or young person type impulses in young kids. But I was sitting there watching Avatar: Last Airbender with the older toddler, and the Avatar character, Aang, she looks at him and she goes, I really like that guy. I want to give him a hug. I was like, oh, that's nice. She's like, yep, I love him. Now, she's said she'll go to the dentist and announce her love for the dentist. She uses the word freely. But she is clearly fixated on that character in this kind of way of like, oh, here's this cute boy who seems approachable and nice and kind of sweet-natured, but he has, he's also kind of powerful and he can do these kind of neat tricks. So she seems aware of Aang in a way that I've never seen her be aware of other characters. And it's I don't want to read too much into it, who knows. But it's very cute. It's very cute that she gets excited about Aang coming on screen and seems to have this secondary relationship with him that seems mature beyond her years. Anyways, this is my first rambling attempt to do an Enlightenment Cafe for YouTube. I'm going to hit the stop button. I'm going to upload this at some point. Questions, comments, let me know. Subscribe, and we'll see. We'll see if we continue down this path.